Good morning, welcome everyone. Nice to see the clouds parting. I just wanted to extend my deep thanks to Jeffrey and obviously Betty, the power behind the throne as well, for making all of this possible, for bringing us all out here and bringing us all together. I first came 2 years ago, and it's been an incredible experience getting to know everyone and sort of having this sharing of ideas and experiencing the incredible beauty and warmth that is Hornby. And special thanks to Kroon as well for his amazing logistical work, keeping us all in order and making it seem so seamless when actually behind the scenes it's an incredible task he undertakes. And also to James for sort of, I don't know what James does, but he seems to be important. So, yeah, exactly. So effortless. And also a big thanks to everyone on Hornby, because whenever I come, it's an incredibly warm, generous atmosphere here and an incredibly magical place. So thank you very much. So I'm going to get going on my paper, which is talking about the architectural roots of the Jeffery Rubinoff Sculpture Park. I'm actually a trained architect, and I'm just finishing up my PhD now. Taking a few years out of practice to do a PhD in contemporary architectural theory. So it's a great honor and pleasure to be here and to sort of get out of my zone as well, talking a bit about sculpture and a different world and how that connects back to my own world. So in order to understand the Jeffery Rubinoff Sculpture Park, one also has to understand a huge suburban shopping mall in London, Ontario. This might sound like a surprising, even absurd claim, yet the two sites have a profound and complex relationship. Indeed, the former would not even be possible without the latter. This paper attempts to explore the role that Rubinoff's architectural experiences have played in the evolution of his design principles. It's necessarily limited, and we're not going to have time, unfortunately, to engage in specific or detailed analysis of Rubinoff's individual artistic works, his artistic career, or the building work he commissioned. Similarly, the limits of the study prevent me from defining or positioning the negotiated terms of architecture, sculpture, or park. Rather, I'm aiming to highlight how the thinking evident in the construction projects with which Rubinoff was involved as a young man went on to inform the strategies deployed in his sculpture park. We will briefly explore three architectural aspects of the life and work of Jeffery Rubinoff: his early architectural influences, his actual architectural work at the White Oak shopping mall, and finally, the architectural conceptualization of his sculpture park. Jeffery Rubinoff grew up surrounded by the making of architecture and was exposed from a young age to both the business and the practicalities of designing and constructing buildings. Throughout his childhood, his father, David Rubinoff, was amassing a property empire that would ultimately become one of the largest hotel chains in the world. His was a brutally efficient model of architecture, where construction had to be simple, fast, and low cost, using highly optimized program configurations. The resulting structures had to be similar the world over, but also different enough in each place to feel responsive to their various locations. The successful execution of this form of architecture required especially effective management, monitoring, and budget control to realize prescriptive intentions quickly and efficiently. This was the conceptual and business model of architecture within which the young Jeffery Rubinoff was ensconced. Rubinoff was also gained invaluable practical experience from his father's expanding property business. He visited numerous building sites as a child, and by the age of 16, he had already designed an open precast lattice breezeway, doghouses, and an Olympic specification tennis court for some of his father's hotel projects, as well as being involved in the actual construction of an apartment block. In this way, Rubinoff gained first-hand experience of the design and execution of objects and spaces at a variety of dimensions, all of which had to relate to a human scale, help fulfill a specific practical function within a budget, and work within the parameters of a larger project. Together, these formative experiences proved enduringly important to his subsequent conceptual, spatial, and practical approaches to architecture. Yet despite a childhood saturated with architecture, Rubinoff doggedly pursued an interest in art. Every time I went in another direction that seemed desirable to me, he has said, I was always tracked back to being an artist. Professional artistic success came early. By his early 20s, he had already had not but one, but two one-man shows in Toronto. His dealer at this stage, Alan Maslow, told him, I can sell everything you can put on a coffee table. At first, this is exactly what the young and impressionable artist did. But Rubinoff soon realized that he had little interest in producing exchangeable, contextless commodities whose principal purpose was keeping dust off coffee tables. He wanted to create bigger works that demanded prolonged engagement from their viewers and that explicitly related to their specific environments. However, as Rubinoff became increasingly alienated from the art world and reflected on his future as an artist, a unique architectural opportunity presented itself. Back in 1962, David Rubinoff had acquired a large plot of land on the outskirts of London, Ontario, as part of his rapidly expanding property empire. He had hoped to develop a new shopping centre on the site, no doubt influenced by the early and successful schemes in the United States. The general concept of building a large collection of retail and entertainment outlets on a single site had existed for several decades. In 1923, the developer J.C. Nichols opened a 55-acre outdoor country club plaza in Kansas City, bringing together entertainment, retail, and, significantly, a large car park, notionally integrated into a whole through stylistic allusions to the Spanish city of Seville. The idea of such a development being suburban was a more recent development, evidenced by the then innovative Northgate Center outside Seattle in 1950, followed by the Lakewood Center in Los Angeles County in 1951. But the transformative innovation of this evolving typology was made in the early 1950s by the recent Viennese immigrant Victor Gruen. This was the enclosure of all program elements under a single roof. The mall could now operate as a single integrated space, creating a self-contained world that was insulated from what went on outside. Consumers could move freely between eating, entertainment, and shopping, all the while unaffected by changes in time and weather. The potential financial benefits of such a model were huge. However, the idea of a large suburban mall was not without its risks. The 70-acre suburban Shoppers World in Framingham, Massachusetts, which had opened in 1951 to huge fanfare, soon bankrupted its developer. David Rubinoff was no doubt aware of such risks, and moreover, his resources were increasingly focused on his hotel business. Unable to make a strong business case for such an undertaking, he sold the land. In 1968, however, the buyer of the land went bankrupt, and the whole property came back on the market. David Rubinoff was given first option to buy it, as he still had a personal guarantee on the land. This time, he saw an improved business opportunity for the successful development of a mall on the site, so he repurchased the plot. However, with the hotel business consuming the majority of his time, he needed someone else to take charge of the project from start to completion. The timing was auspicious, given Jeffery Rubinoff's increasing disenchantment with the art world, as well as his father's concern that his second son would not make a living as an artist. Given the years of experience Jeffrey had of the family business, both on and off site, his father asked him if he would be interested in developing the mall by himself. Jeffrey accepted, but only on the condition that he would have total control of the project. Rubinoff's decision to build a shopping mall seems deeply ironic. He had, after all, only just condemned the art world for its unfettered consumerism. But his acceptance of the project elucidates both his deep pragmatism as well as his critical engagement with capitalism. Rubinoff didn't only want to make a first-class building with real character that could serve the community in a traditionally low-income area. He also saw the project as an extension of his earlier artistic activities. Rubinoff has stated that the mall had to become an artistic project or he could not have touched it. Similarly, he talks of understanding the building as sculpture in 360 degrees. The mall gave him the opportunity to practice his art on a huge, much larger scale than ever before, and, importantly, on his own terms. Here, he could be his own client and was no longer subject to the whims of paymasters who were simply trying to decorate their apartments. Here, he could engage on his own terms with the capitalist system he believed was corrupting the art world. Rubinoff had to work strategically to ensure that the White Oaks shopping mall was not only the artistic project he envisioned, but would also come in on budget. He undertook meticulous analysis of the budget items and made significant tactical cost savings that he diverted towards the design, materials, and artwork. He assembled an experienced team from his and his father's contacts to execute the project, consisting of a commercial lessor, a construction architect, a construction contractor, and respected interior designers. He insisted that the entire team had regular meetings so that everyone worked together, not separately, right from the start, in Jeffrey's words. He had become, as the London Free Press dubbed him, artist, developer, and administrator, all in one. The project ultimately finished on budget and on time, with over 60% of tenant spaces occupied at opening, and all of a desired quality. But the mall was more than just an efficient execution of a set of defined functional parameters. Rubinoff had also produced an architectural design that created much broader effects and affects. The modern commercial mall was arguably invented by Victor Gruen in the early 50s. Gruen designed the Northland, Eastland, Southland, and Westland, imaginatively named, shopping centers for the suburbs around Detroit, where he made significant advances on existing commercial shopping developments. First, he mastered the anchor store. This was a model whereby each development would have one or more large, well-known store from which would run internal streets lined with smaller stores. This anchor store gave the developer a large, stable tenant and created a prominent draw for shoppers, which in turn attracted smaller tenants in search of exposure to that foot traffic. Second, he experimented with enclosing the various connecting elements so the visitor could move seamlessly between stores, entertainment, and eating, all indoors. Third, Gruen ensured that circulation around such developments was self-reinforcing. There could be no dead ends, but only clear routes that exposed visitors to as many shop fronts as possible without having to double back on themselves. And there had to be easy access to and from a sufficiently large car park. Last, and perhaps most intriguingly, Gruen betrayed his Viennese socialist background by incorporating a careful sequence of public spaces, such as courtyards and gardens. The mall was a place to sit, rest, meet, and talk, as well as to consume. Gruen's 1954 Northland Shopping Center in Southfield, Detroit, is a good early example of his thinking. 163 acres of shopping, comprising a huge J.C. Hudson anchor department store with a ring of shops surrounding it, including lavish landscaping, a bank, a post office, infirmary, and sculptures, all in turn surrounded by 100,000 parking spaces. Gruen's 1956 Southdale Center in Edina, Minnesota, is in many ways the iconic refinement of this concept. It is fully enclosed and highly introverted, with blank exterior walls so that all attention is focused on the enclosed two-level interior, which is connected to a two-tier parking system. 70 stores were linked to 2 anchor stores, which surrounded a large public planted square in the center that included sculptural trees, a fish pond, cafe, balconies with hanging baskets, and a 21-foot cage filled with birds. Time magazine described it as a pleasure dome with parking. An architectural record noted that there was nothing suburban about Southdale except its location. The anchor store layout, the clear route-based internal circulation system, and the complete interior enclosure of the White Oak shopping mall all betray the influence of Gruen's earlier innovations. Rubinoff executed the simple single-story plan of a large anchor shop, in this case, the Sayvet department store, which in 1976 was taken over by Simpsons, connected to internal streets of other retail and entertainment connected to internal streets of other retail and entertainment efficiently, creating tactical cost savings as discussed above. Crucially, he invested these savings in a whole range of aesthetic strategies that were designed to make his structure more visually affective. These included significant sculptural work outside the building, the dominant formal and material treatment of the exterior, and the choice of materials and lighting inside. These elements were more than just cosmetic. They were carefully considered interventions that created performative affects whilst also offering up a broader conceptual self-critique, as we shall discuss. Let us begin with the sculpture itself. As one approaches White Oak Shopping Mall from Wellington Road to the east, one's view is dominated by three large, abstract, Corten steel sculptures that Rubinoff designed specifically for the location and then personally installed in August 1973. Weighing over 12 tons in total, they demarcate the main pedestrian entry point to the mall. One loops up and over one of the three pathways, rising 20 feet into the air to form an entry arch of sorts. The two smaller, solid, triangular-shaped structures each lean from a separate grass island formed by the pathways. The swath of parking in front acts as an apron to foreground the sculptures, lending them presence and scale against the building mass behind. They work in counterpoint with one another, alternately flattening and deepening spatial depth as they hide, reveal, frame, reframe, and offset each other and the building behind. Their matte, planar surfaces absorb the colors, light, heat, and cold of the environment, and so constantly change appearance through the long, hot summers, the rains of the fall, and the snows and ice of winter. The large surfaces form coherent masses, and from certain angles they seem to be architectural objects. Indeed, the archpiece clearly recalls a building's structural steelwork. Gruen's model for the introverted mall had blank exterior walls. Rubinoff kept to that precedent in strict practical terms, but inverted it conceptually. After all, his exterior is much more than blank. Rubinoff wrapped the entire building in a vertically striated concrete wall angled at 72 degrees. He did so to, I quote, create an illusion of added height, adding interest and excitement to the mall. The walls are directly related to the sculptural effects we've worked to achieve with the entire complex, end quote. The angling of the walls also ensures that their dominating heaviness is not intimidating. The result is that the building looks anything other than a mall. The large mass betrays few references or clear readings of what it is or what it does. It becomes an ambiguous, abstract mass in the urban landscape. In many ways, it is reduced to the same terms as the sculptures that flank it. As they become architectural, it can easily be seen as yet another abstract sculptural object in the round. The mall's concrete wall is punctured by the main entry beyond the three exterior sculptures. A large, extruded, triangular Corten steel-clad form projects over the 11 doorways below. The sensation is of a square, heavy mass rotated at 45 degrees, hovering over the lightweight entrance below, almost squeezed into the puncture of the concrete. The proportions, at twice the height of the doors it appears to hover above, creates a clear marker, providing not only practical shelter above the entrance, but also drawing visitors inside. The vertical surface of this mass itself has architectural echoes in its reorientated Core 10 decking and simultaneous proximity to cheap suburban cladding. The materiality of Core 10 also connects it to the language of the surrounding sculptures. The slower rhythm of this vertical cladding contrasts with the faster and regularly irregular vertical extrusions of the surrounding concrete walls. The effect is to slow down the horizontal reading of the building mass and mark this as a different and special moment where the mass is penetrated. The sculptural begins to morph into something architectural. The transition from the exterior to the interior is dramatic. As one enters a darkened world of reflective black floors and ceilings, lit only by the light from the shops and sporadic spotlights. What in plan are highly standardized interior public spaces are transformed by the use of black reflective enamel floors and ceilings accented by theater lighting. The surface reflectivity creates a heightened sense of oneself and one's scale, as one catches sight of one's own silhouettes and reflections above and below. The interior also creates a sharp temporal break. While the Core 10 and concrete on the outside are inscribed with temporal processes such as weathering, aging, staining, and rusting, the interior is a perennial night. The disjunctive acoustic qualities of the interior emphasize this change. The hardness of the surfaces ensures that the noise of others is ever present, making it feel even busier than it actually is. These visual and acoustic jumps from the surrounding suburban environment create a sense of geographical displacement. The nature of both the hotel room and the mall is to create a transitory place, abstracted from immediate geography and time, so that it can function anywhere, anytime, for anyone. But it would be wrong to think of Rubinoff's mall as a completely blank transitory space. In fact, he wished to create the effects of a very specific place. It was like Times Square on a rainy night, recalled Rubinoff. The choice of Times Square is the simile of the space, as the simile for the space is intriguing. It is a bustling place at the heart of one of the world's major cities, so to invoke that in a shopping mall is understandable. But beyond the cliché of a city that never sleeps, there is a menacing element to this displaced temporal fixity. It is also a night that never ends, a lurking darkness of ambiguous reflections, uncertain depth, undefined edges, and ends. In the 1970s, Times Square was an epicenter of iniquity, where prostitution thrived alongside petty crime, and illicit drug use was a fixture in nearby peep and strip shows. This was the darker side of consumer capitalism, where human desire and exploitation ran rife in a self-destructive spiral of oversaturated pleasure-seeking. This is not to make any kind of moral judgment, but simply to note the ambivalence of Rubinoff's comparison. Beyond the superficial appeal of a different cosmopolitan world lies a rich self-critique. The mall is, at least figuratively, also a debauched and self-destructive den of iniquity. If Rubinoff's final act in the commercial world was as commodified as it could have possibly been, it simultaneously critiqued the very system for which it was built. Either way, White Oak Shopping Mall became an exceptional financial success, and within 3 years of its opening, Rubinoff was brought back to expand it further. It created a thriving new centre in London, Ontario, and brought new shopping experiences and public spaces to the town. The mall has generated high yields ever since, enabling Rubinoff to live and work on entirely his own terms, without clients or the needs to sell his work. Given the latent critique of capitalism that Rubinoff embedded in the mall, it is obviously not without irony that its success enabled him to complete his rejection of what he perceived as a compromised capitalist art world. But he was not rejecting it for architecture. I was an artist. I wasn't an architect, Rubinoff states. I was looking for something else. As the White Oaks project was finishing, Rubinoff embarked on a protracted search throughout the western interior and coast of Canada for land on which to live and work. After months of looking, he found a rundown farm on the west side of Hornby Island in 1972. The land was large and isolated enough for his noisy and messy sculpting, and yet still connected enough to have basic services and infrastructure to enable material transportation, as well as his own travel, without too much difficulty. After moving in 1973, he got to know every inch of the property and profile and down to 16 feet, I quote, through farming it. It was not virgin land. It had already been shaped by decades of agriculture. However, the physical and practical difficulties of farming made it unsustainable in the longer term, and Rubinoff stopped farming the land by 1980 as he began to focus on a fully fledged return to art making. But farming the land had given him a deep understanding of the geography, biology, meteorology, and geology of his new home. And this proved vital for his subsequent landscape interventions. Rubinoff did not explicitly conceive of his land as a sculpture park until the early 1980s, but the Jeffery Rubinoff Sculpture Park is ultimately the result of his cumulative acts of landscaping over 30 years, most of which he executed by himself, or together with the help of the land curator, John Kirk, whom he first employed in 1986. Rubinoff declares himself to be the landscape architect of his sculpture park, but his procedures were not like any traditional landscape architect. He has had no formal professional landscape training. He did not work from or with drawings. He did not possess an explicit plan, and he did not collaborate with any other landscape design specialists. Yet his architectural experiences of designing and executing integrated spatial environments proved vital in creating the setting for his sculpture. At first, the Jeffery Rubinoff Sculpture Park seems deeply pragmatic. Around each sculpture, the land is mown in a series of concentric circles, with larger swaths of mown grassland connecting the various sculptures, but without a single directed path. A few berms and swales are evident, but it is not immediately clear whether they are a hangover from the land's prior uses or something more. The location of the land on the western side of Mount Jeffery results in considerable runoff from the mountains in the temperate climate, so the practical management of drainage throughout the site is indeed a key concern. The berms and swales that Rubinoff has constructed across the site are in many senses motivated by such concerns to make the site navigable and control runoff more generally. In concert with careful tree plantings, they reduce the physical and acoustic presence of the built interventions on and around the site, shielding views of the small clearing for parking, the neighboring properties to the north and south, and the road to the west. But these seemingly simple interventions are much more than straightforward, and they can only be understood by recalling the architectural spaces that Rubinoff produced with his father and subsequently at White Oaks. We have already identified how the nature of hotel spaces, where Rubinoff gained his architectural experience, and the mall spaces that Rubinoff himself created share an intriguing similarity. They are geographically and temporally abstracted. They are introverted spaces that attempt to detach the user from his or her environmental context. In many senses, these are what Marc Auger has named non-places, spaces that are not relational or historical or concerned with identity, and they're simply to be passed through. They are also spaces of anonymity, ones that create only a temporary identity. Similarly, we noted how Rubinoff mastered the design of a highly effective, repeatable plan configuration at the mall, using efficient route systems to create a series of spaces optimized for consumer capitalism while lacing this highly pragmatic structure with a subtle critique of capitalism. It is in this context that we can read the clearings and curation of his sculpture park. Here, on his own 192 acres, 90 of which is completely forested, exonerated from responsibility to anyone else or any other overarching system, Rubinoff was free to modify the land as he saw fit. And so he made a very pragmatic series of interventions over more than 2 decades to stabilize the land, using only subtle tree plantings, berms, and swales to keep it, I quote, feeling like nature is here, end quote. This is not to say it was haphazard, but it was the opposite of the non-places that he spent previous years creating. Here, there is no clear plan configuration, path, or set route. Here, one has deliberate dead ends. One has to double back, attempt to reorient oneself, passing by sculptures numerous times at different distances, never quite sure if one has seen everything or not, unclear what is part of the park and what is not. More than this, and again in complete contrast to the mall and the hotel projects, there are no clear spaces. Mowings blur into overgrown grasses, which slip into tree-covered areas. The mowings negotiate the transition between the completely man-made and the completely natural. There is no center and no clear edge. There is no hierarchy given to the layout of the sculptures, nor any immediately perceptible rhythm to their placement. Unlike the mall and the hotel projects, nothing is standardized, nothing replicable. And perhaps most significantly, nothing is introverted. The placement of the sculptures and the cleared spaces make a place that is totally dependent on its surroundings and the passing of time. From the ever-changing light on this westerly-facing land, altering the colors, shadows, and reflections in his steel surfaces, to the counterpoint of the works to the ridgeline of Mount Jeffery behind, the tree lines that surround it, or the distant mountains of Vancouver Island to the west. Here, the marks of passing time are not abstracted and denied as they were in the mall, but instead become part of the work. The corten is left to weather, the bird droppings left to stain the steel, and the lichen allowed to accumulate. Here, construction is used to minimize the man-made surrounding and highlight the natural context, making a place where the man-made sculptures and natural surroundings work symbiotically. The Jeffery Rubinoff Sculpture Park is, of course, not architecture. But this paper has shown how it is born of an architectural understanding. The park is nevertheless the antithesis of his commercial projects. Where they sought to detach themselves from their geographical location, the park is not only grounded in, but also produced by its singular site. Where they used architecture to create fixed experiences, deliberately untethered to temporal variations, the park is constantly sculpted by the diurnal, seasonal, and geological changes. And perhaps most importantly, where they were built to satisfy insatiable capitalist demands, the Jeffery Rubinoff Sculpture Park creates experiences that are ultimately an end in themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's really great to see those photographs of the mall in particular. Many people here probably haven't seen those before. So that's fantastic. Thank you again. Does anyone want to start us off with comments or questions? Vid?
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess I just wanted to apply a bit of pressure on this, on a kind of value judgment that I think is operative, because you, at some point, you refer to the mall, or the concept of a mall, certainly as a non-place, but also as a kind of self-destructive den of iniquity or something like that. So, I mean, I wonder whether, I'm just curious, is there a place in architectural theory to move beyond this kind of Manichaean, all malls are bad, a park is a place, Can a mall ever be successful, or can a place of commerce ever be also a site of authenticity or interesting relations?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vid. I don't think I'm trying to say that it's a sort of simple binary of all malls are bad, but I think I think that's why the context of Jeffrey's sort of rejection and of the art world and feeling that it's just become this totally commodified system is what enables us to sort of access the understanding of the mall. Because I think it's obviously tinged both ways. The essential purpose of a mall, as you see in those Victor Gruen examples with Northland, if we go back, look at that. These are like vast megaplexes with seemingly no concern for anything but pure functionality, like optimizing rental returns, getting people through as efficiently as possible, like maximizing value and no other concern. And this is coming from someone who is trying to sort of create. It comes from a background of a deep upbringing from a city which was all about public space and public interaction in the space. So I think it's not a simple binary of it's all evil and bad, but it's that sort of capturing of how can we work with that and really kind of self-critique it subtly, but also make it work really, really well. I mean, I think Jeffrey's undertaking there is astounding. That he's transformed something and made it operate exactly as it's intended to, without being exactly as everyone would expect. And I think that is a masterful act in a way. And very clever and cunning as well, I think. Very strategic. He got it to work for his own ends and also bring a sort of new awareness to people who are going to purely consume, And I think certainly, there's actually a lot of very interesting contemporary social theory about how the mall does create a real sort of deep anthropological pace for teenagers and kids, which is, it's safe, it's protected, it's manageable, it's navigable, it's sort of observed. That has sort of dangerous undertones of the panopticon as well. But yeah.
Actually, I was not going to talk about this, but what you were saying, actually, in local malls in the vicinity where places I've been, now malls are policed to play so that there aren't too many kids roaming around in large packs. They're not allowed in after a certain hour. They're not allowed in. It's very interesting that you say that. I'd never seen those interior shots. That, I'd only seen one picture of, the one that I had. Is it still this way?
I don't know. I haven't been there in 25 years.
It's been sort of modified and sort of updated and renovated and expanded. It's still very successful, but it's successful in a different way. And I think it's interesting. They've actually inserted a lot of roof lights now and sort of tried to make it feel very open and an awareness of the outside.
And bring in daytime.
Bring in daytime.
The problem was, and I saw it at the time, this was a working class suburb. Almost 90% of the shopping was done between 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night. In the East, in the wintertime, 5 o'clock is just a dreadful light. The light is just absolutely awful. So what I wanted in what I knew then, was that for this working class suburb, this was their center, and normally you'd end up with all of those things, those skylights and all those other things, which were absolutely useless to the actual use of the mall, right? And so it kind of like, one thing I didn't want to do was bring dead light into this thing. So there's so much dead light in the East. There's a Toronto gray that is so oppressive through most of the wintertime that it just, it's so different than here. This day, which is a spring day, is also typical of winter light that we have here. That's one of the things of choosing the West Coast was about the light. What I didn't want to do was bring this dead light into the mall. And it wasn't even the least bit practical at the time. So we're dealing with 1972, 73. The statistics showed that almost all the shopping went on at night. So why not give the excitement of what happens of shopping at night instead of trying to bring this dead light, which is like very architectural, because everybody who's an architect says, we got to bring in all of this light. There's no light. The light didn't exist. It was either dead light of dusk or the horrible light, the light of night, so what was the point? So that was the kind of thing I was looking at the particular time. And so I wanted to get that excitement. And the sense of shopping at night and doing those things does have a slight bit of danger to it, but it's that danger that makes it exciting, of being out and into this environment. This was so good. This environment was so good in its time that I brought in a lighting guy just to look at it. His name was Cy Shemitz, and he was at Yale. He was specifically a lighting guy. He came in. He said, "You don't have to do a thing. This is brilliant." So what's so interesting is a couple of years after he was there, Bloomingdale's did their New York store over with this black reflective ceiling. That was after Cy had visited it and saw it work so well.
Just as an aside as well, I mean, something I didn't talk about in the paper was the kind of sort of social context. I mean, it's a very poor, rundown neighborhood in those times, and Jeffrey was really bringing a totally new set of experiences and like sculptural work and artistic sensibility to an area that didn't have a hope of having any of that in any other way. No one was going to go and just put some public art there. I think that as well is a really kind of amazing act in itself. To run it really efficiently, to be able to save that money and direct it towards investing in the art and creating these, indoor, outdoor, enlivening public spaces.
And are your sculptures still there?
Yeah.
In what condition are they in?
Can't move them.
What condition are they in?
I don't know. I've only seen photographs. They destroyed that beautiful entrance. They put glass front on it, and I just was horrified. But the whole area was a pretty terrible urban or suburban blight area, and this did not inspire anybody to do anything better. So in the last 35, 40 years, the urban blight just grew all around it. So, but I needed to point out a couple of things and I did to Alan. When, of course, I was anti-capitalist from the time I was an undergraduate and graduate, so I was taking on this capitalist project. First thing, while I was in the planning stages, I had the opportunity. A friend of mine was a community organizer, and there was a meeting of community organizers in London. Just happened to have been there, and he said, "Would you like to come and talk to them?" And I said, "Yeah, I sure would." So I sat with this group of community organizers, and I said, "Look, an artist is taking over this particular project. Bring something creative to it, and we'll make it work within it. This is a community center for the people who are going to live there." It was just dead in the water. Their mouths sort of dropped open, and I got absolutely no response. So I learned something then, is that people would rather complain than actually do something about it, because this was a chance to act. This was one of the nice things that I found about capitalism, is you could actually act. So I gave the community organizers a chance to act, and they were dumbfounded. That I thought was a really interesting part. So we never really had any of the community. I talked to people. I tried to get the city to put them in, to get community organizations to actually take over free space in the mall. Take it over, and we would subsidize it. And because it was part of the community services, I could not get any community services in it over the years of its development.
I think Sergey has a question or comment.
It's actually, Jeff, I've never been there, but looking at this mall, and I see your imprint on it right over. And in a very specific way, in a way, I think it's much easier to see Jeffery Rubinoff in that mall after being familiar with his work, rather than look at the mall and see how it expands in his later work. Because to me what it says is Jeffrey's ability to manipulate human perception on a very sublime level. Because even until recently, when you read commentaries about art, etc., very few actually focus how important is our perception. And in the last decade, we've learned a great deal about it. And I firmly believe as we move into the future, Jeffrey's art would be understood and used as an example of it more and more. It's our historical perception that we inherited from millions of years of evolution. Look at this mall, for example. It's an absolute commercial marvel. The mall has two purposes: to bring people in and they keep them there. So when you look at it from outside, it evokes, with these slanted walls, it's a hill with a cave. So from thousands and millennia ago, we feel comfortable in front of it. Whilst we're faced with a wall or a negative cliff, it scares us. We want to move away from it. But here it's invited. We want to be inside. We don't want to be outside. And once you get inside, it's a night. And what you do at night, you never go out. We started to go out at night only very recently, but for centuries and centuries we never go out. So in this case, Jeffrey's ability to manipulate human beings on a very sublime level is masterful. I'm very happy that he stopped doing commercial projects and went to the art, otherwise it could be very dangerous.
That was a great, insightful comment, Sergey. Should we take one more question? Have we got time for one more, Karun?
Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I just have a very quick question. In your presentation, you mentioned that the park is the opposite of the non-places that Jeffries is the opposite of the non-places that Jeffries created in his previous experience. So, do you think that instead of actually the architectural roots of the park, the things that we should look at is, you mean the non-architectural roots? Because you start with the idea of how his architectural experience affected the designing of the park, but and at the end you are calling these experience, this background, like the non-architectural. So the things that we should look is just the architectural or the non-architectural roots.
Thank you. So I guess the essence of my argument is that it's got an architectural concept, an architectural sensibility, but he's using it to create something that is not architecture. I'd say that total sensitivity to the environment, the changing light, temperature, that different sense of time, whether it's like the day, the seasons, the years, the geological time, and that total sort of synthesis of the context in framing your experiences as you move through an environment and what it's doing to you, I'd say is incredibly architectural. Thinking about what it's trying to do functionally and practically, but most importantly, affectively for your mood, the kind of atmospheres it's creating and the way it's activating and engaging with the environment around it. I think in that sense you can say the mall is the kind of total non-architecture, the sort of object mall. It's a pure, functional, brutal system with no kind of sensitivity to architecture. Whereas I think that it's what I'm trying to say is that I think that sort of latent architecturalness to Jeffrey is evident here, and it's a way of understanding what's happening here and a way to sort of read what's happening here if it can be read. Does that make sense? Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Can I just actually ask one very quick question? I just thought of it. What about the most recent building that Jeffrey has erected, which is the one we're sitting in? Could you link that to some of the things you've discussed in the paper at all? Is it possible?
Yes, it is possible. Thank you. I think this building is a separate. For me, I read it as very separate to the park, and in many ways, I think. Forgive me if I'm wrong in understanding this, Jeffrey, but I think it's a very sort of pragmatic addition, given that the park is taking on public visitors, and I wouldn't say it's of the park. It's additive to help the park work on a pragmatic level. I think obviously there's a lot of sort of modernist illusions here, but I don't think this is intrinsic to the park and the understanding of the park. For me, the park begins. The park's there. This isn't part of the park. I'd say this is a bit of architecture which is added to help the park function practically.
Well, yeah.
What happened to that being the last question?
It was built for that function, yeah. It truthfully was. And if you notice the way that it's laid in what the location is that it's separate from the rest of the park. You don't see it from the rest of the park, right? So it's meant to be the entrance to the park, but not necessarily of the park. So yeah, you're right to that extent.
Perfect. That's a great place to end. Thank you, Jeffery.
Well, yeah, let's indeed end there.